Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Now, guys, today we're going to be reviewing a film, well, one of my favorite horror films of all time. But before we do that, Daniel, do you just want to tell the people what this series is?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we look at a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we're talking about something that Hervé and I have just seen for the first time. And Jonathan, you know this one well. Why don't you go introduce it?
We're going to be speaking about Barbarian. For me, one of the best horror movies I've seen. I wouldn't say in a long time, I'd say of all time. So, for people that don't know what Barbarian is, basically it's a horror film, a horror thriller movie where two strangers end up renting the same Airbnb in a rundown area in Detroit. And then they end up spending a night together. One sleeps in the living room and then the other sleeps in the bedroom. And then that leads to them discovering some sort of hidden dark secret in the house, in the basement. And then it gets wacky from there. All right, guys, before I ask you what your thoughts are, let me just make a point. The reason why this film is one of my favorite horror films of all time, I wouldn't say it's the favorite, but one of my favorites, is because I felt like this movie goes against the norm when it comes to the horror genre, which I feel is very repetitive. This one felt like I was watching something new. And the main reason for that is because is the way that they had three stories in one. And they had like interlining clues, especially between Tessa's story in story one and AJ's story in story two. Like they have foreshadowing moments. Yeah. So this movie for me is like it's a movie of growing suspicion, intensity, and unforeseen revelations. Like honestly, like the way that they play on suspicion as well. Like you don't know what the threat is. You don't know if it's Keith. You don't know if the threat is from the neighborhood. Obviously, there's a scene which you guys will end up seeing. We'll get to the spoiler later. Or you don't know if the threat is actually the house itself, and you don't know what. Like you pretty much, I think they did a good thing where you don't know what the threat is, and they're just like a growing mystery. But there's other stuff as well which I liked about the movie. But I'm gonna reel in my emotions and reel in my thoughts for now. Well, Daniel Hervey, what did you think about my choice? This is my first choice, by the way, guys. Usually it's Daniel. You know what I'm saying? But this time I had to recommend this one for Halloween period. As you can tell, I'm excited. But what was your thoughts?
Hey, sorry to burst your bubble, but this was just not great at all in any way, shape, or form. And actually, to be fair, the first story I actually found it interesting, but I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know what the threat was. The whole dynamic between Tess and Keith at the start, the whole she's in this rundown neighborhood, straining outside. She has nowhere else to kind of go. They set that up really well, and then the whole is he like a threat? Is he a bad guy in this? Kind of kept me on edge. And then when it was established that he wasn't, and then the story went into part 2 and part 3, that's when it completely lost me. That's when I was like, okay, it was just completely weird, and I just kind of lost interest in the movie completely. And I don't think what they did was, I mean, it's not super original in terms of there was this guy that had this basement and stuff like that with where he was holding people hostage and this and the other. So it's not super original in that sense, but it didn't quite add enough or add anything that I really cared about in the story while I was watching it. So by partway through, I was just checking the time. I was like, okay, when am I done with this movie so that I can move on with it? So yeah, I didn't have a good time with this one. But Daniel, maybe you had a better time than I did. Maybe.
I'm not quite as negative on it as you are. So I think the first part is by far the strongest. By the first part, I mean Tess and Keith showing up the same Airbnb, and this whole chess game that they play where they are trying to figure each other out and try to figure out who the threat is. I think that part is excellent. And I think this is one of those movies where they had one good idea and then realized that that wasn't enough to fill a movie, so they started adding more stuff. And the 3 parts seem pretty disparate. And I think the first 2 clearly have parallels in terms of talking about the same subject from different angles. But the third one, where it turns out that there's a monster in the walls and this father raised his daughter kind of in the basement essentially, and she turned into this feral monster creature. I don't know that it really held together very much and ended up saying very much. I think one of my principles for approaching horror is that it should remind you of a fear that's relatable in some way, like a fear you've had before or you can very easily relate to because it's so universal. And here, this whole thing about you arrive in a situation that's slightly off, and there's warning signals, but nothing concrete. You just get a bad vibe, and that's it. But you can't nothing's actually happened. That's actually a problem yet, right? And that part really worked. And after that, it quickly fell apart, I thought. And by the ending, I had a really hard time actually caring. And I think the movie really needed to connect parts 1 and 3 together more, where there was some kind of point to the secret of the house and what went on there. Like, it looked like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And it didn't seem like it did. It seemed like a bit like, okay, we have this really cool idea for an opening, and then then there has to be a monster somewhere because it's a horror movie. And that's kind of how it came across as. So I'm really curious, did we miss something about that? Like, I can make a connection, right, where in part 2, AJ is clearly a predator, right? And then the father, what was his name, Frank, right? We also kind of try to control and abuse his daughter and his wife, and we're kind of seeing the aftermath of that. So there are parallels there, but I'm not sure that's enough to really have a story that really hangs together.
I think part 3, I understand you guys' points. I disagree, but I understand. I think part 3 was showing the consequence of the message that was trying to be portrayed. And I think the main message that was trying to be portrayed was a film that tried to pretty much encourage women to pretty much stop ignoring red flags.
Yep.
And I think that's like a very current situation, not even a current situation, it's always been like that. I think like a lot of women, what they do, they kind of like ignore their intuitions. Like, for example, right, there was a scene with Jess, right? There's many times where, like, just throughout the movie, she's hesitant about something because her intuition is telling her, okay, danger, but she still proceeds by going to the danger. For example, when she discovers the door, right, the basement, she looks at it and she goes, no. I was like, okay, I think when she said no, I thought like that's like a representation of intuition. I might be looking into it, but it is what it is. But then she proceeds after like 4, she kind of like rationalizes and then proceeds to go to the danger. Same thing when she first met Keith. Even though I get it, cool. Even though they both are in the Airbnb and it's late at night, she could have still gone back into the car and just driven and just try and find somewhere. She could have stayed at a hotel, even if it was full, because he did mention there was a convention, but she didn't know that beforehand. But she could have just driven to a hotel, stayed there with his people, but she proceeded, like, her intuition was telling her, look, this is a bad idea to stay with this guy because he's a stranger. But still, she still stayed anyways. So throughout, I just think it was a film that was just intended to pretty much, I think it was like towards women, but it was like a mixture. Like there was, I think, especially with part 3, right? I understand it's very like for me, I was thinking to myself, like, how the hell does this relate to the first 2 parts? But there's scenes, for example, like I think with AJ, I think it relates to him because it's kind of like foreshadowing his future in an exaggerated way, as in like your predatory ways can lead you to some sick stuff like this. Of course, not necessarily him, doing bad things to his daughters, but it could lead you into such a dark path like this guy. And also with Jess, pretty much she's in a situation due to her not trusting her intuition. So I think that was the main message at hand. And also, in terms of the part 3, I thought that was great because they kind of like showed a great way of showing human and superhuman elements of evil, which wasn't like too far-fetched, because if you know how obviously that monster was conceived, it was already under circumstances against the norm. That's why I feel like he just did the director, the makers behind this movie, obviously there's different themes. They're just different themes throughout, and they just kind of like, they did it in a creative way, just a creative vision. And I think they do. I honestly do think like they don't. Now they may not like entwine like perfectly, but I think there's like. But to be fair, which movie, like most movies aren't perfect, you know what I'm saying? But this one, I think they're like the message behind it was conveyed in a very, for me, different way to other horror movies in general.
So the thing about ignoring red flags, right? Like I watched this on Amazon, and every time I moved the mouse, these little hints and background information popped up, and it was there as well. And that, I think that is clearly in parts 1 and 2, where basically essentially Tess has to make decisions on who to trust and who not to trust, right? And she always gets it wrong, right? She's mistrustful of Keith, but he turns out to be a decent guy, and she trusts AJ, and he turns out to be a monster. And she trusts in the police, and they're completely useless and completely dismissive of anything she has to say. And she's afraid of Andre, right? The homeless guy, but he turns out to be well-intentioned and just wants to help people, right? Because he knows what's been going on in that house, and he knows how to stay safe. So I see the idea, right? My thing is just, number one, shouldn't the movie have taken that somewhere, and in a way that ties into who and what the monster is? Like I can see the idea of trust a little bit, because like the wife presumably trusted her husband, and then he turned out to be the monster, and then she found herself locked in her basement, and presumably like just spent the rest of her life there, probably. So she trusted the wrong person as well. So I guess I kind of see it.
Yeah.
But I guess I was kind of looking for some way to connect the monster to the theme, right? Where often in monster movies, the monster is kind of the theme made personal, right? In some way. It doesn't have to be completely literal, but something like that often happens. And I kept looking for that here, and I just didn't find it really. Other than that, you're supposed to trust your family, and the monster is the result of family gone bad, essentially. Just not sure that's enough to carry the movie.
I see what you're saying, but when you say carry the film, for example, part 1 and already the first 2 parts link already, right? So that's like half of the film. Well, that's technically more than half of the movie. Mm-hmm. So for you, you're saying that the third act killed it for you. And if that's the case, but most movies endings, I think you said this before, most movie endings, they just don't end well. But before that, like Act 1 and Act 2, it was enough for you to say, okay, this was actually a good movie. So why for Act 3 was it so bad? Was it because obviously that reason that you just provided right now? So you're saying that reason alone is what pretty much made the film capitulate?
I just didn't find the punchline, just so to speak. Like I didn't find what the ending had to do with the message of the film.
I see.
Which has to do with trust and trusting the wrong person and ignoring warning signs. I can imagine how to do that, but I just didn't really see the movie doing that or trying very hard. And I've also seen other horror movies where they have a good idea for a beginning, and then in the end they just put in a monster to finish the movie, right? Cobweb was the same way earlier this year or last year, where the first half is this really well done family drama about these controlling helicopter parents, right? And then in the second half, there's a monster in the walls, and also a monster in the walls, and they kind of just need to defeat it or fight it. Mm-hmm. And this seemed a bit similar, where once the monster showed up, this movie stopped being about something. Yeah. When in the first half, it very clearly tries to, and it's kind of really obvious how, say, Keith and AJ orbit the same thematic space, right? Mm-hmm. But then that kind of just stops in the end. And I think that's really the part where the movie kind of lost me.
I see. For me, I just saw that part as like it was the result and the consequences of their bad decisions, just portrayed in monster form.
For me, what would have made it a little bit more interesting, kind of like the end of the movie, would have been if the guy survived. I can't remember the name of the second guy in the movie. AJ, if he had survived and she kind of like went back to go in school, like save him, despite like him kind of, there wasn't really anything like there between the two of them anyways, but like despite him kind of like not sort of kind of like following her word, this, that, and the other, and like him obviously like kind of like being a bit of like slime ball or whatever, it would have been interesting to kind of see the message from the perspective of like him surviving, and of course like again we're like talking about mistrusting and like having like bad faith in sort of in men from women essentially. It could have been interesting just to kind of like see that maybe like hammered home with like when he threw her off of like that tower that they'd climbed off, if she had actually died and he actually used her as a means to survive. And I think I was only kind of like thinking that mainly because I kind of lost interest in the movie at that point, and I was kind of like looking for some type of different ending from the kind of like typical movie ending that you get. But yeah, I thought that would have been an interesting direction for them to have gone in.
I hear what you're saying. In that scene there, especially, I thought for me, it was pretty much a slap to perpetrators who always get away for the acts that they do. And for me, it was like, okay, so this time the victim actually wins. Because they're like, even like in that scene, right? Because one thing that surprised me about the movie, which I'm going to ask you guys as well, what surprised me about the film was like the foreshadowing that was happening, right? Like there was even a scene, I don't know if you guys realized, but you remember the snake, I think it was like a pendant that was in Jess's car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like they showed that, I think they showed that twice or once, but they showed that pendant when AJ was coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even there was like even like the conversation between Jess and Keith, right, where they're talking about bad men, and then introduces AJ. So I felt like, yeah, what's just surprised me about this movie is just the way that the foreshadowing kind of like played out and just the way that it was executed. It for me, it felt smooth. It like felt refreshing because usually like horror movies are just pretty like they're basic. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're very basic and they're very like you know what's gonna happen, but you lot didn't get like a sense of surprise from this film at all. Like comparing to other horror movies that we've seen, number one, two questions. How does this compare to other horror movies that you've seen? And also, didn't you feel any like surprise with what you were watching? Were you surprised by what you were watching at any moment?
Just on the kind of dynamic between Tess and AJ, it maybe had some more interest kind of going on there if there was some type of like pre-existing relationship between sort of AJ and Tess, because when they kind of meet, they're just kind of like two strangers, and then it's just a case of like, and they've like kind of like introduced him like partway through the film. He has kind of like no real connection to Tess or Keith, anything like that. So it was kind of a bit jarring, and it didn't add enough for me in that sense. So I think that was a bit of a misstep. But in terms of like the surprise, there was only a negative surprise when they actually showed the monster and then kind of like the direction it went from there, because the whole like psychological thriller that was kind of going on at the start of the movie when they were in sort of the Airbnb, like Daniel said, I was like all on board for it. I was sort of super intrigued by it. They're playing this like kind of cat and mouse game where he's trying to prove he's a good guy. She's obviously like not really trusting of him. He's like trying to like just kind of to get to relax, whatever like that. So when it took a different direction, it was a bit like, okay, cool. Like not really my thing. And again, I'm not a horror person, so it's just not my thing to have like kind of those like monsters and stuff like that in sort of the movie. So to answer your like second question, in terms of like comparing it to other horror movies, I'd probably defer that one to Daniel because I know he's more into the genre than than I am. But of the ones that I have seen, especially sort of kind of the ones I've been forced to watch this year, like Long Legs and Night Swim and this and the other, it kind of just feels like more of the same. I don't like. I feel like Long Legs kind of like stands up for me. That's one I do the most. But it kind of feels like more of the same, of just like kind of like some people in a unfortunate situation, and there's just kind of like monsters about and whatever, and obviously like different circumstances, different situations. But it didn't feel refreshing at all.
There are some things going on here, right? So there's this trope in horror called the final girl, which is the final survivor. So you start off with a group of people and they get picked off by the killer or by the monster one by one. And then you have one survivor at the end who barely gets away, right? And that trope is called the final girl because that character is almost always a woman. There's very few examples where that's not the case. And this kind of same thing happens here, but there are like the movie does play with that idea a little bit. So at one point, there is, for instance, making the monster female as well, kind of plays with that a little bit because we've like the entire movie has been about men being predators, and now the literal monster is a woman who is kind of driven by the kind of this instinctive need to be a mother, right? And she's kind of learned what that is from instructional videos, and she doesn't really understand it. So I don't know what it means exactly, but there's something there, right? Like they did not have to make that choice, right? And then another thing where, in terms of surprises or something that didn't seem to be quite in a template is at the very end when AJ and Tess are with Andre, right? And I'm not sure where they're hiding, but they're hiding from the monster somewhere. He kind of has this moment of realization where he says, I don't remember exactly what he says, but something along the lines of I've made a lot of mistakes in my life and this I'm going to fix, or something like that, right? Referring to it is his fault that Tess got shot, which was an accident, right? But he's responsible for it. And for the first time in his life, he's going to take responsibility for his actions when in the past he's always tried to get out of responsibility, right? In every other context we see him, that's what he tried. That's his instinct. And then 2 minutes later, he literally throws Tess off the rooftop in order to gain a minor advantage that doesn't even work. So I'm not sure what this means. Does this mean that men like AJ are just irredeemable, even if they have a moment of regret? They'll, like, at the first chance, they'll just revert to being awful and predatory and selfish? Is that the message?
If I was gonna say one thing you can maybe pull from that and like came to me immediately was that, like, you know, you have like these abusive relationships where, you know, guys abusing the woman, and then at a certain point, you know, she feels like he's changed. She feels like he's different. He's like maybe like doing a few things differently, but then always revert to some kind of like their type essentially. So that's maybe something that you can kind of like pull from there in terms of like a parallel between, because obviously this is like a lot of this movie is the dynamic between something like men and women. So that's kind of one thing that you can pull from there, is that, you know, even though they kind of do, and it's like I agree with you. It seemed very genuine, and you like really felt like he'd turned to leave, and he was like very remorseful about sort of, you know, what he'd done in the past. But then the moment that he was like back in a kind of like high stress situation, or sort of, you know, in a bit of danger, he reverted back to type, and he reverted back to sort of being the type of person that he was essentially. So that's kind of one thing you can maybe pull from that.
And at the same time, the movie warns you that this guy was a snake with the pendant. So I don't know if the overall message is trying to say that these type of people will never change. That's a good point. However, in terms of his character alone, the message was trying to tell us that this guy is not going to change. Like, you know what I'm saying? The pendants, you know what I'm saying? Just pretty much the foreshadowing of the pendant. So, but I do hear, so wait, even if that was the message, do you have a problem with that, Daniel? That those type of people never change?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. It just seems incomplete, right? It doesn't seem to kind of really drive the story, really, because it's just a moment. If there was like a more obvious payoff to this, like either him pretending to be a better guy than he is, but then in the end he isn't, or him genuinely having a moment of realization and regret, and then acting on it from that point out, right? Because like up to this point, all the things he did, he probably didn't think were very serious. But now there's an actual life or death situation, so it might have been interesting. Like one possible way to do it might have been for him to genuinely change, because for the first time in his life he's taking the situation seriously. Like in that scene where he talks to his friend in the bar, and they talk about the assault allegations, right? He's downplaying it, like he's saying it's not even that serious. It's nothing. Right, it's just somebody overreacting. Like he doesn't take it seriously. He doesn't think it's a big deal, and so he doesn't take responsibility. But one way it could have been is if the situation does become a big deal, then maybe he's a different person, and maybe that changes him going forward or something. I'm just speculating here, right? What it could have been. I was just kind of missing kind of the last leg of the journey of the argument, and it doesn't have to be that. It could be the other way around, right? But him just turning on a dime and sacrificing Tess for his personal advantage immediately for no direct reason. Like for instance, like the movie didn't really sell me on the idea that he tried to be better, but he then ran out of options or something. Like he just was looking for the first chance to revert back to selfishness, and that was a little bit unsatisfying. Like give me some kind of reason, give me some kind of decision, like some kind of crossroads or something. And it seemed really rushed in the sense that it just happened without, like, he didn't even last 2 minutes in that new state, and he also didn't seem like, I don't know, like he was making excuses and everything, and he wanted Tess to forgive him, right? He was essentially pleading with her to forgive him about how, don't you see that I had no other choice or whatever, right? But I don't know, it felt unsatisfying.
Okay. This is a bit of a sticky one, because I was going to ask, right, do you feel like we were the intended target? Because obviously with the message that I just revealed. But at the same time, it's weird if it wasn't, because I'm assuming, I haven't seen stats on this, but I'm assuming most horror fans are male. Because whenever I speak to women, like, a lot of the times, they don't like horror. So I'm just assuming, right? I'm just assuming. So
maybe.
Depends.
I think depends on the subgenre. Like true crime and anything to do with serial killers and that sort of thing notoriously has a mostly female audience. Whereas like monster, like creature features probably has a mostly male audience, I would guess.
Okay. Because I was going to say as well, because if we weren't the director's intended audience based on the message, do you feel like that's the reason why I maybe because I think Hervey just didn't, because Hervey said he didn't really understand what the hell was going on in part 2, part 3.
I
So,
did actually.
oh, you did, you said?
I didn't. I just didn't
Oh, you
like it.
didn't. Okay, you did.
Yeah.
Oh wait, you did, but you just didn't like it.
No. Pretty
Okay,
much.
cool. Okay, cool. So pretty much, like, do you feel like you guys couldn't? Firstly, what was your initial reaction when it comes to what do you think the film was trying to tell you? And if it was that it was pretty much trying to say women stop ignoring red flags, do you think if you knew that originally, you would have enjoyed the movie more and you would have resonated with the movie?
What I think it is that the writer discovered feminism the week before and wanted to talk about it. And this is not the first time I've seen this in the last 10 years. Like I've seen it happen a bunch, and the result is almost always very surface level and very basic. Like it's a bit like, you guys, did you know that sometimes women are afraid around men? And that's kind of the impulse that went into making this movie. And I think because of that, I think that's why it doesn't quite sing, because it's not really been thought through. It's not something that's been on the director's mind for a long time. It seems like something he discovered very recently. And that's supported by this also, like in the Amazon annotations, it said something like that the director read this book that essentially talks about that topic, and that prompted him to make this movie. And I've just been through that dance a few times where you get very basic stories out of it as a result, where the writer thinks it's the most profound insight ever. And so it doesn't need to be very complex, or it doesn't need to be very developed. That's maybe a fairly uncharitable interpretation, but that's how it reads, right? Like, look at how one-dimensional AJ is. And I'm sure, like, obviously, people like that exist, right? That part's not unrealistic exactly, but his characterization is very simple, right? And I don't know, that's the entire thing gives me those kinds of vibes. And even if we're not the target audience, we can still detect what the movie is doing. We can still see it doing what it's doing. And I can see the parts, and I'm not sure they fit together is my thing.
What about you? Do you think if you understood pretty much the message, you would have taken the film differently?
I think I kind of like, I feel like Daniel summed it up quite well in terms of like, you don't, like, you can kind of like see the message unfolding throughout the movie and like start to kind of like unravel it and understand it. And
they outright talk about it, right? When they're sitting on the couch drinking wine, they're outright talking about it.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to AJ in his car being Hollywood douchebag or whatever he is. So like, it is like subtle as a sledgehammer.
Yeah. And there's a difference between having something in the movie or having a message in the movie and executing it well. And like Daniel mentioned, it's like it's all very surface level. There's nothing really like deep about like anything that he's like really put in here at all. Again, you talked about sort of the target audience. There isn't really much food for thought, like whether you're sort of kind of like male or female. I'm not coming away from this movie kind of like taking anything away super differently. Like, you kind of know that sort of in a situation where a woman's vulnerable, obviously you have to like kind of like tread carefully around that. Obviously, you know, the whole situation, like the only thing that you can, and they don't really like touching it at all, but the only like situation or like thing that you can maybe like partly take away from it is the whole like holding your friend accountable for like their actions. So like the scene where where like the guy's at the bar, AJ is at the bar with his friend, and they're kind of like discussing the situation, and of course AJ is like kind of like downplaying it or whatever, and it's like you can maybe try and take something like that away from it, but there isn't really anything profound, I believe, to be taken away from this, whether you are a male or if you are a female watching this.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you can imagine stuff where to take this idea, right? Or like maybe she trusts a woman and is not suspicious of that person because she's a woman, and then she turns out to be the real villain or something like that.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of halfway there with where she mistrusts Keith for no specific reason. Like, he doesn't actually do anything inappropriate, right? Or he doesn't, like, when he shows up, like I kept thinking like, hey, maybe in this situation leave the bottle of wine in the fridge. Just
yeah.
At least wait a day until you've actually like you're both more at ease with each other or something. Like, if you want to come across as not suspicious, hey, maybe leave the alcohol away. So he does do a couple of things where it's a little bit suspicious if you don't know, if you go into a blind and you don't know. But ultimately, he doesn't really do anything that even in hindsight is a red flag, right? And maybe you could have inverted that a little bit where there's a character that she trusts for, like, she mistrusts Keith for not bad reasons, but she's not correct in this case, right? And then maybe there's another character who she trusts for bad reasons, because she has an idea of what people who aren't a threat look like. Something, right? You can explore this idea in ways like that. And the movie didn't seem very interesting. Like, I'm not saying it has to do that, right? But like, you can take this basic idea, right, and talk about it by exploring it and building on it, and taking it somewhere. And I felt like this movie didn't, and that's kind of my problem with it.
I see. But firstly, I don't want people to get it twisted. Don't think, for me personally, even though the message was important, for me that wasn't the highlight for me when it comes to this movie. For me,
So
it
what's
was
the
just like the highlight was pretty much like the growing suspicion. Like there was like parts in the movie where something will happen. I'd be like, oh crap, I didn't know that was gonna happen. As in, like, I didn't know that, because like I didn't know that was the threat. For example, like the segment between what's the name, Jess and Keith, right? He was acting hella weird. I felt like he fulfilled. Okay, he was a good guy, but I think a good guy is a criteria of being a serial killer. Not all the time, but a lot of the times, right? So he was acting awkward,
like being charming and stuff like that. That tends to be the case for serial killers.
Exactly. And then you raised a good point where he like brought out the wine. I was thinking, like, my guy, either you don't have no awareness or you're a killer.
And he's not that naive, right? He knows exactly where she's coming from.
Exactly. Do you know what I'm saying? So there was moments the way that he was just acting, even the scene when he was in her bedroom and he was just looking at her. And even though it was reciprocated because she was looking at him too, but it was just a bit weird and a bit awkward. And then obviously the revelation of how he's like a big time, like he's like a big shot. Even like I found that scene interesting because the way that she responded to that kind of, she started to feel more comfortable, even though she felt a bit comfortable before. But now I was like, okay, I'm a big time, I'm a big shot. And then she felt pretty much, she let her guards down. But it's like, this guy's still a stranger.
It's because he was like familiar. It's because like they like wasn't when they talking about like this movie that was like very obscure and not many people had seen, but of course because like he had like some type of relation to that field, it like made it feel more familiar and like had like, and it's the whole like having more in common with like certain people, and then you have like this whole like us they thing situation kind of going on where he then becomes part of her like us group essentially, where sort of they have like things in common, they have like common ground essentially. Is what I was trying to say, but I kind of like stopped you mid-flow.
No worries, but you raise a good point because that added to the growing suspicion, man. Because you know a lot of these like serial killers, psychopaths, like they know things about you. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, even though I'm not saying that he studied her or nothing, that's not what I'm implying. But it's like sometimes you don't even need to know someone, or you could just kind of like, I don't know what the term is called, but you know, like people that can read, like they can read your mind, right? But they'll do tricks to read your mind.
It's called a cold reading. It's when you say something that's vague but sounds specific.
Exactly. So stuff like that he was doing, like he showed stuff like that sometimes, especially in that scene. So I was like, even though it's a bit far-fetched because he would have to actually mention the scene in that documentary, I think, where it actually happens. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, her first response was, surely he's lying about having seen the movie.
Yeah.
Then he actually shows the details and shows that he has in fact seen it.
So like he pretty much ticked the boxes when it comes to the criteria of him being a suspect when it comes to the threat. And then when to find out that, oh, okay, he actually wasn't the threat when he ended up coming out through the basement. And then you just see the monster. I'm like, oh crap. And then when AJ's story was introduced, thinking that he was the main threat, because obviously he's pulling up to the car, and then he ends up being a main threat anyways. But I didn't expect him to end up being a threat. I just expect him to be a victim. So the fact that, again, there was another twist in it, it was just like, so I think mainly for me, I think the movie had a message that it wants to convey, but I don't think that was the main point. Maybe for the director it was, but for me, I took it as, okay, I have a point that I want to share, but I still want it to be a horror movie, like a kind of unique horror movie, my opinion. And it was a horror movie, like I said, it was a horror movie just that raised a lot of questions because it was very intense. It was very suspicious, and it relied on just pretty much like I said, unforeseen revelation. So yeah, that's. So you guys generally don't believe that this is different from other movies that you've seen? Okay, to be fair, Harley don't really watch.
I mean, the subject matter is very topical, right? Like this came out in 22, probably made in 2021.
But the way that it was executed, though,
yeah,
in terms of like the three stories into one, because if you watch the trailer, right, because a lot of people have mentioned this as well, they said that the film wasn't what expected. Yeah, so Barbarian technically was like false advertisement, but it worked for them because when you watch the trailer,
it advertised as? What was it advertised as?
It was advertised as Keith and what's her name?
Tess.
Keith and Jess, yeah. pretty much just advertise around the house, and Keith and Jess, you know, I thought like the movie was going to be revolved around them and the house, and it was going to be not haunted, but the story was going to be revolved around them mainly and just in the house. So I didn't expect all the other stuff.
So for me, the structure of it was probably the most interesting thing, because that is outside of the standard template, but it then comes back to the standard template of there's a creepy house and and there's a monster and people are trying to survive. Like it comes back to the standard way of doing a horror movie again.
Well, was it a monster though?
Yeah.
Well, not really.
There was no.
The monster.
Not sure of her name.
She's not really a monster. Isn't she just human? But obviously she's deformed because obviously she was conceived through, unfortunately.
She's like feral because she grew up in a basement and completely deprived of human contact and all of that, right? But like functionally in the story, she's a monster. Like there's no communicating with her. There's no negotiating. She just wants to kill and do her thing.
But you didn't find that interesting how she's technically still human, but she's like superhuman in the same time.
But the whole person living in the basement or living in the walls, I've seen that a bunch of times.
The whole her being superhuman as well didn't make sense, because when they were like kind of like around the little fire with the homeless guy, he was saying this was like a result of like inbreeding upon inbreeding upon inbreeding, which then kind of like led to the monster. But then it was only like a 30-40 year kind of like period. Like it didn't quite seem. It
might be
seem
60. If it started in the 60s, then it might be 3 generations maybe. But like the father showed up in the end, and he was old, but like it was still within his lifetime, and he was like 40 in the 60s, so he's not 100 now. I don't know. So it doesn't quite add up, I don't think. Yeah, unless that was his son played by the same actor or something like that, but that's not intuitive. Like I've seen The Hills Have Eyes, and I've seen Cobweb, and I've seen like this whole idea of people being inbred in remote locations to the point where they become feral monsters is not a new idea, and there was nothing different about this monster or her design or anything like that. Putting it in Detroit maybe might be a little bit interesting, but that's only so that there's like an abandoned neighborhood.
Apparently that street wasn't even shot in Detroit. they shot it somewhere else, and obviously I think they built those houses.
But it's set in Detroit, right? Like
I'm just saying. I just found it interesting.
Detroit has these large stretches of completely abandoned housing where essentially everybody left a long time ago. And this is one of those, right? But it doesn't really matter other than it's a remote location. Like it's just we need a remote location, and we've done cabins in the woods a few times too often and stuff like that. So let's do Detroit, which is fine, but it also didn't. All it is really it's a remote location, and Tess is out of her element, and she has to stay at an Airbnb. It's kind of it.
How did you guys feel about Jess's character?
She's fine. Not much to her.
Yeah, she kind of got taken out of the movie like halfway through for a period, and then like flung back in the third act. I mean, like that again, like the whole like first act between like her and Keith was like serviceable enough. It was cool. Like it was good. Like
that was really good. I thought. Like nothing wrong with that
at all. Like and it was like quite interesting in terms of like sort of how intuitive she was being and like how intelligent she was being. And then it kind of did feel like she was being a bit stupid towards.
That's what I said. That's like Mom. Like she was very ditzy. Like some of the decisions that she was making, I was like, all right, cool. You're pretty much putting this on yourself.
Yeah, like roaming around the streets at night. I mean, again, like the police officers in this were like shown to be purposely like stupid and naive to the situation, like purposely bad at their job. Because if someone said that they've been kidnapped and come out of a house, as a police officer, like you have to go and investigate. But fair enough for the story, like they can maybe like. I mean, if it was like implied that there was like a lot of like homeless and like drug users in the area, then you can kind of like maybe tie it to that, but you don't really have anything to tie it to as to why like they were so dismissive in that sense. But for her to then barely escape with her life and then be this sort of, I don't know, so hell bent on sort of going to save this guy, even though she knows that like as long as he like cooperates, she won't kill him. She's like not a threat if he cooperates. I feel like she could have made different choices in that situation. And that's apart from that, again, she was kind of like taken away in the second act and then flung back in to do like kind of like not action hero stuff, but like kind of just sort of escape the hell that she was in the third act. So at that point, there wasn't really much kind of going on or like any further development to her character at that point.
Okay. To seeing how you guys have been crucifying my film. Let's try. Let's try and find something positive. Did you guys have any highlight moments?
The opening sequence is great. Just have that be the movie and have like build on that. This whole idea of not knowing who you can trust and making the wrong choices, or where you don't like, you have a reason to be cautious, but ultimately it's a mistake in that situation, or like something like that. Just keep that going. Don't have a monster, just have the idea of who can you trust, and you make assumptions about what trustworthy people look like, and there may be good reasons for those assumptions, but they may not serve you in a particular situation. Like, I think that's the most interesting angle of this.
But isn't that repetitive though? Because that's how like a lot of horror movies, you could argue, are like who is the threat? Like without the monster, right?
Well, I mean, this has the gender stuff in it, right? Where like they talk about how the plot, like the movie would be different if they had arrived in a different order. If Tess arrived first and then in the middle of the night Keith shows up at her door, it's a different movie, right? So I think that part, I think that's your unique angle, and that's what you needed to build on. And it feels kind of abandoned in towards the end. And I think if you really built on that and really thought that through and really created an interesting situation, and they do it a little bit, right? Like she's afraid of Andre in the beginning, like when he first shows up, and he ends up being the most trustworthy, and so on, right? Like, so this idea does keep coming up. I think the way you fix this movie is to have the plot like completely built on this idea that there are a number of different people, and some of them you can trust and some of them you can't, and you can't tell who is who by what they look like. I think that's the angle that's interesting.
Yes, same here. And I think that was like the selling point of.
But that's only 1/3 of the movie. Is my problem.
I'll give you one that wasn't part of like Act 1, because I know we've like praised that a lot. So it was impressive. Well, I say so it was impressive. It's actually quite easy to like make me like creeped out or like scare me in these like horror movies that we've been watching. But the scene of like her making them drink the milk out of the bottle, I was like proper grossed out by that, and I was like, okay, yep. Like you done your job there. I'm grossed out. This is not what I want to be seeing on the screen. And the fact that she had to like drink from it as well, it was just like, not not great at all. But that's my like
that was effective,
one. Yeah.
For me, I will agree with you guys. I think the first act or the first story for me was like the favorite one, because it kind of felt like a first date. I don't know if you like guys kind of got that vibe when obviously just like an awkward first date. And then also another scene as well when pretty much when the actual threat actually began, when was it when Keith was having his dream and just his door was open? That for me, that was pretty intense. Did
you forget to lock the door? And he was like making noises in his sleep.
But that's why it's interesting, because Keith was the one that closed the door.
But she made sure to lock it every time.
True. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. She
like
made sure
every
to
time she goes to the bathroom, every time she's in the bedroom, the camera makes it very clear to show that she's locking the door every time.
Yeah. But I don't think that.
So did she just forget that one time?
Yeah, that time, because she pretty much let her guard down, because as soon as he closed the door, she just fell on her bed, like pretty much flustered from the interaction. So that scene, no. But that scene for me, I thought was brilliant, because when he was having his friggin' dream, and obviously her door was wide open, I was thinking, this guy's, and even his reaction, I was thinking like, I was like, yo, like you're being a bit aggressive here, but at the same time, I understand, because like there's just a girl looking down at you, like waking up, like just waking you up. So like just the tension in that scene, the unintentional tension in that scene, and just like the growing suspicion. So I was like, okay, who the hell opened the door? Like, was it him or was it something else? Do you know what I'm saying?
Just forget, right? Something like that ambiguity again, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah.
One other thing I liked was how reasonable Tess and Keith were being in those first 20 minutes. Like none of them are.
Oh yeah.
How reasonable they were being. They both understand what's going on. They both kind of try to prove to each other that they're trustworthy. When Keith makes her a cup of tea and she doesn't drink it, he says, would you like to watch? Like, should I make you another one and you watch this time? That sort of thing, right? None of them were being unreasonable just for the sake of the plot, right? Or to create unnecessary drama. I thought what this part was really effective at is generating a situation in which that tension is natural, and then characters act in reasonable ways, the way people would, and the situation kind of carries itself, right? Like a lesser movie, I think, would have had him be much more unreasonable, or be offended that she wants proof or something to that effect, right? The fact that that both of them were so reasonable about it, I think, just made the situation stronger.
And to add to that, I felt like that scene was kind of like a reflection of what reality would look like, and like if someone was actually in that scenario, I think they would actually behave the same type of way. So, and you're right, like in other, like in movies, they'll just make it more exaggerated, and someone kind of be like, the guy would be the jerk. But in this one, I was like, okay, that's like, I can see the realism in this one.
The really big problem I have with this movie is that it has an idea, but it doesn't then drive that idea to its conclusion, right? Like create a scenario in which that kind of dynamic and that subject matter actually drives the plot to interesting places, as opposed to just kind of doing that a little bit at the beginning and then you go off to something else. Like that's kind of what I was like. That's what could have made this great.
I hear that. I hear it. It feels like consistency is the issue. It feels like that is the issue for you. You just didn't feel like it was cohesive.
It stops too early. It stops too early. It doesn't. It takes like the first 2 steps are good, and then you need to keep going. Like they go the entire way.
For me, I feel
like what is it specifically? Like, what's your favorite bit about this?
My favorite bit about it, I think, is the revelations. So kind of like each time something's revealed in terms of like who the threat is and what the threat is, that was my favorite part. Because obviously the threat is throughout, like you're just guessing what the threat is throughout, you know what I'm saying? And then there's something surprising that happens. I didn't expect, or like, you know what I think they should have done though? This is a critique because I feel like I've just been praising this movie. I think they should have kind of gone into, because you guys have kind of briefly mentioned it as well, but they should have kind of gone into Frank, the guy that kidnapped and doing the abuse. I think they should have kind of gone into his story a bit more, because I do understand why people would be lost, because it's like, was the film trying to convey that this guy is just a sicko, or was there a reason behind what he was doing? You know what I'm saying? The way that he was doing it. At first, I just thought, okay, he's just a sicko. He's just, you know what I'm saying? Because people, we've seen cases where people lock people away in a dungeon and, you know, do what they do. So, but I think it would have been more interesting if they kind of gone into his story as like part 3, and then to make it more, you know, to link it more with the first two parts.
And maybe putting that story in the 60s, or when it looked like the 60s, or even the 50s. And I'm not sure if that timeline adds up, but putting it that early might have been a mistake, because what if you had set it during the decay of Detroit? Like they say something along the lines of, while this neighborhood is going down the drains, when are you leaving? And he says, I'm not going anywhere. But maybe he does this because like his neighborhood is unlivable now, and so he has to kind of go underground, or he has to kind of keep his family there by force or something. Maybe that could have been something that ties more into the history of the place, as opposed to being kind of just his own psychopathy.
Okay.
The other problem with like them not expanding on kind of like his story or his character, kind of like showing enough of it, was that there's this like moment in the movie where I can't remember who says it, but they say like she's not even like the biggest like, or like the darkest thing in the house, or like the biggest threat in the house.
Andre says it, yeah. There are worse things in that house than her.
There's worse things in the house than her in it, and it's obviously like implied to be sort of, you know, Frank essentially. So even like when AJ is kind of like backing up to the room that he's in, she then like starts to back away, and like obviously like she is like the big threat in sort of the movie, but then is scared of like what's behind the door. And then obviously when AJ goes in there, you see this like weak, feeble, like kind of like old man who's like completely defenseless, but he's meant to be the bigger threat, and he's meant to have maybe like been the one that's like obviously like created this sort of, you know, like monster in her. And I feel like there could have been something interesting there. Like there's like lots of like kind of like interesting sort of like tidbits in this movie, but that's like another like interesting sort of, you know, message that they're putting in the movie, but it's just not kind of like handled well at all. Compared to her, he's like powerless. He's like no threat at all, has his gun and like, you know, shoots himself in the head when it's kind of like someone else discovers what he's done essentially. But it's just it's one line, and it's like a bit inconsequential in terms of like the rest of the movie really, where it could have been a really like good sort of, you know, like kind of like plot point throughout, sort of, you know, or good talking point throughout the movie.
And I think there's lots of stuff like that in this movie. We say, okay, if he had run with this, you could have had something cool. And this is one example, but there's others as well.
Sorry to
That's your favorite movie, but
Yeah.
that's how it goes.
It's cool, man. I think it's time to go to last sports anyways, bro. All right, guys. Last sports and ratings.
Last thoughts. It's a common feature with like a lot of movies these days where there's like good ideas just not executed well at all. And again, I'm not a horror person anyway, so if you're not going to execute the story or the message in the movie well, and then you're going to kind of do. I thought the horror was a bit lackluster in this. There was like a few kind of like weird, creepy moments, but overall it was a bit kind of like lackluster. It didn't quite like grip me at all. I'm not like mad that I watched it. Could have been a lot better than what it was, but it's not. To me, it's not anything to hide it, and probably not worse than that either.
So for me, the bottom line is this had a bunch of ideas in there that had potential, but potential is cheap. You need to actually take it somewhere interesting, and I didn't think the movie did. That's kind of what it comes down to. It's a very surface treatment of its ideas. It's whatever was on the mind of the director at the time he wrote it, and he didn't seem very interested in actually exploring those ideas or actually saying something about them. And I think that's rife. That has lots of potential in the horror genre, right? We've talked about how that might go, right? But you have to actually do it. You have to actually take that somewhere interesting where you say, okay, that's an interesting idea, or that makes sense, or that works, or that's unsettling, or something. You can't just write one good scene, which is the dialogue between Keith and Tess, and that's your movie. You need to write an entire movie.
Well, everyone knows how I feel about this movie. Like I said, one of the best horror movies for me. The way that was advertised wasn't what you actually got, and I was pleasantly surprised with that, because usually when I'm pretty much faced with false advertisement in the trailer, I'm usually pissed because the movie ends up being rubbish. But this one, I'm glad that it was portrayed the way that was portrayed, like 3 stories in one rather than just one that you got from the trailer. But yeah, man, all in all, overall, I had a great experience with this film, memorable, and I will continue recommending this no matter what these two say. All right, guys. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Have they?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts down below. Is this one of your favorite horror movies, or are you like us and you thought it kind of missed the mark on what it was trying to do? Whatever your thoughts, write it down in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. We will see you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.